Hi, folks. I'm Josh Gutwill, a learning scientist and the co-director of the Clean Conferencing Institute, which I'll tell you about in a second. I'm here to talk about the benefits of virtual conferencing and some of the improvements that have already been made in this area and some ideas that are coming down the pike. I wish I could be with you all in person, if for no other reason than I'd love to be able to answer your questions. If you do have questions or if you just want to reach out to me and follow up, please email me. I'm putting my email on each slide, so you'll be able to see it throughout the presentation. So I thought to talk about improving virtual conferencing, I would start by just asking, well, what's the problem with in-person conferencing? I mean, you're all there doing it right now. I wish I could join you. Well, it turns out that in-person conferencing is a significant contributor to climate change. People take about 85 million conference trips every year in the United States. And each of one of those trips emits about 2 to 3 metric tons of carbon dioxide or equivalent gases. And that adds up to a lot of carbon. Conference travel emits about 3% of all the carbon emissions from the United States. And that, just to give you a sense of it, that's about the same as the annual emissions of Chicago and all of its suburbs. So it's a significant amount of emissions. Now, on the other side, there are benefits to virtual conferencing. Obviously, the first is sustainability, environmental sustainability. They emit very little carbon dioxide. There is still some, but very little. But also, they are much more accessible and can be much more inclusive than in-person conferences. They're cheap and easy to attend. And because you don't have to buy flights, you don't have to book a hotel, all of that. And that leads to increased attendance. We often see almost doubling of attendance at virtual conferences compared to the in-person at the same association. And this is especially true for international conference goers, early career professionals who may not have funding to pay for travel, people with young children who can't get away, or people with disabilities who have mobility challenges. The problem is that virtual conferences, as we experienced them in the pandemic, were mostly pretty bad, right? And so at the Clean Conferencing Institute, we're working hard to make virtual conferencing good enough so that associations of all kinds will do more of it. And our vision is of a world where associations alternate between virtual and in-person each year, getting the benefits of both and cutting their carbon emissions in half, essentially. And we focus on mostly current or like near-term technologies. We don't want to wait for, cool VR headsets or bodysuits like you see in Ready Player One, because the climate crisis demands urgent action. And so we're trying to shift conferencing more quickly than that. But we do focus on networking. The hallway conversations, coffee breaks, exhibit halls, entertainment events, all those things that allow people to meet each other and interact with one another during conferences. How do we bring those experiences into the virtual realm in a comfortable, engaging way for folks? So to improve virtual conferencing, we focus on 3 legs of a stool: platforms, activities, and social norms. So I want to give you some examples of current and future best practices from each one of these. And the purpose here is really just to encourage all of you to try a variety of things in your own conference work, whether you're an attendee or whether you're a conference planner. So the first leg of the stool is choosing the right platform. Now, thanks to the pandemic, a whole bunch of conferencing platforms have emerged that are much better than Zoom for informal networking, for allowing you to choose who you talk with. So for example, what's called spatial platforms allow people to move themselves around, seeing and hearing really only the people that are close to them. And so you can join and leave conversations at will. And this is much more similar to a real world cocktail party or a conference hallway, coffee break, exhibit hall kind of experience. Another example are platforms that use roundtables for their breakout rooms. So improving on the Zoom breakout room, these roundtables, before you enter, you're able to peer inside, so to speak, and see who is present, how many seats are available, what's the topic of discussion these people are chatting about. And this can dramatically reduce the discomfort of joining a conversation. So in terms of the future of platforms, we're seeing research now that's focusing on how to help people meet others at a conference who are working in relevant fields or working on relevant issues. So really focusing on how do you find the right people to talk with at the conference. And in this mock-up of a coffee break, you could imagine a system where you can hover over someone in the room and the system would show you things that you have in common with that person, like people you know in common or common interests you have, or maybe sessions that you're both planning to attend. And then you would hover over the next person and see who you might, and think about, do you want to talk with them? And this would not only create an incentive for talking with someone, but it would also offer conversation starters where you could say, "Oh, I didn't, how do you know Teo? Let's talk about that." Now, some of this is underway, and as I said, recent research is pushing this forward. So these are some examples of near existing and near-term platform features for improving informal networking. Now let's move on to the second leg, activities. So we've been thinking about activities in the virtual space as lying on a continuum in terms of how structured they are, from totally unstructured to fully structured, and then everything in between. And I'm just going to give you examples from the two ends of the spectrum today. So on the unstructured end, I've already described how people could mingle in an open space. This could be used for coffee breaks, in between sessions, which should not be in lieu of an actual break. People should also get a real break to be able to get up and stretch their legs. And then on the structured end, you could imagine activities that support informal networking with structured conversations. So one of the ones that we're working on right now is called the after mingle. And this is the equivalent of what people do at an in-person conference where small groups of folks sometimes like hang around after a session has ended and chat about what they heard with each other. And so how do you bring that into the virtual realm? Well, the way we've been using it is it's an optional conversation that you can have after the session has ended. It doesn't typically involve the speakers or the speaker of the session. And it could be just an open discussion in a small group, but we found it's actually helpful to offer a few questions to prompt discussion based on the content of the talk. And the presenter could write those questions, or we've actually been using AI, feeding it abstracts of a talk and having it come up with a set of questions that the group can draw from. And they tend to be really, really good. So in this after mingle, people can come together in small groups and talk about what they just heard in the session. So the last leg is social norms. And people often feel uncomfortable networking in virtual spaces. And we believe that in part that's because they don't have good shared norms for how to interact. So what's a social norm? So for example, during the pandemic, in these Zoom calls that we were all part of, and still many of us still are, we kind of all learned to mute our microphone when we're not speaking, mostly because of background noise. You didn't want to hear someone's dog barking when someone else is talking. And so we learned this norm. And our main suggestion here is that event leaders could introduce specific social norms for particular activities that they're doing. So, for example, in a coffee break, when people can move around and talk to whomever they want, it can be hard to know how to join a group. Like you have to get close enough to be able to hear what people are talking about and see if it's something that you want to talk about, but you don't want to be creepy. How do you do it? Well, at the beginning of a coffee break like this, an event leader could introduce a social norm and say something like, if you see someone hovering just outside your group, say hello and invite them to join you. In terms of the after mingle activity that we talked about, social norms can be modeled by a facilitator. So a person could jump in and say, would anyone like to respond to that? Or does anyone else want to say something? And one of the interesting things about the virtual space is that facilitator could be a person or it could be an artificial intelligence that is listening to the conversation, detecting a lull in the conversation, and jumping in with a prompt. We believe we need to think about social norms in a wide range of situations in virtual conferences. And these are all situations where attendees are usually left to fend for themselves. And that's what we think causes some real discomfort. So whether it's using the platform, and I talked about muting, or whether it's interacting with other people, I talked about how to join social norms for joining the conversation, or whether it's about facilitation and turn taking and things like that. We need to develop and introduce social norms for different situations. So those are the three legs of our stool. I've presented them as kind of separate domains to grapple in, but of course they're actually connected to each other, and we need to think about them in a coherent way as we design for significant improvements. So thank you so much. And again, I hope to hear from you by email. Bye-bye.